Hi, this is Ryan.
Hi, Ryan. It's Patrick and Justin from Oopgo. How are you?
Not too bad. How about yourself?
Pretty good. Just another Friday, so. Are you in Huntington, Ryan? Are you in the same location, or are you at a different office within Firescope?
No, I'm actually in Dallas.
Oh, you're in Dallas. Did you guys, just for my background, did you and Steve have any back and forth talk aside from what I heard last evening on the phone? Just the general, grill product and introduce what they can do. Have you guys had any additional dialogue since then?
No, we have not.
Okay. Justin, are you there? Making sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, basically what this is on our end is just a usually about a half-hour capabilities overview, pretty straightforward discussion, not too formal, showing you what our company can do and open for dialogue and any questions on your end.
Okay.
On that note, if you wouldn't mind, Ryan, I didn't hear much aside from you were the head of marketing. If you could just tell me a couple minutes about your background, I suppose, and your familiarity with either any kind of web analytics or user experience technology or anything on the competitive intelligence end. Either one, I guess, where you lie. So.
Okay. Let's see. My background is kind of a hybrid of marketing and development and system engineering. So I kind of have a pretty diverse background of doing special projects, particularly web-based applications. So doing anything from intranets to CRMs to your traditional websites, generating lead gen. As far as user experience, I have quite a bit of experience on that end. I've been a certified user experience tester in the past, done a number of user experience like group studies and site analysis, things like that. From context of competitive analysis, quite a bit of history of doing that through social media, online interactions, ghosting a company through personal emails, things like that.
Great. Well, sounds like we'll have a pretty productive conversation in that case. So.
Okay.
So as a starting point, our last question to ask, how familiar are you? Steve mentioned a few times he's familiar with T-Leaf. Is that, are you familiar with T-Leaf in particular or any other similar tools?
I'm somewhat familiar with them, as well as typical site analytics like web trends, ClickTail, Woopra. I've used a wide variety of resources.
Okay, so you know that world well, including ClickTail, Woopra, so that definitely helps. So on our end, once again, just to, can you see your screen? You see your main website on the screen?
Yes, I can.
All right, great. So traditional web analytics technologies, what they do traditionally is someone goes on your page, and regardless of, the movement and data that they do on the page itself, you go to the next page, and there's a record being created from the transition from page to page to kind of give quantitative analysis to say, hey, this person went to these pages, this is where he came from, and kind of gives you the 10,000-foot view. So what we're doing similar to a ClickTail or T-Leaf is we're storing all of the on-page activity as well to be able to essentially fill the gaps for any company to know what's actually happened on their website and recreate the entire user experience. So we're doing this with a web-based application, a pretty similar to a Google Analytics, a normal page-by-page tagging. From the storage end, our big differentiators from a ClickTail T-Leaf is, aside from moving storing just the movement, the mouse position, and I suppose the final entry to see what someone did, what they're using is if I type in information, let's say I say Ryan Smith in this field, I wait a few minutes, and then I abandon the form. When there's a call to the server, a record is created on their end that basically says, we're going to search through any calls to the server to come up with the analytics. The point being there is if I wrote Ryan Smith here and nothing was being called on the website end and I abandoned, you wouldn't be able to search through this information that happened within the field itself. So we kind of went a bit deeper to be able to get things such as typing speed within forms, such as understanding any finite detail to be able to customize statistics based on, conversion analysis for every finite detail that happens on a page.
Okay.
Is that pretty straightforward, Ryan?
Yeah, I think so.
Any questions? All right. On that note, yeah, the video end's a lot easier to explain than the data. So on that note, while we're at the data storage differentiator, through that we come up with a lot of customized statistics depending on a company's need to look at a particular form and be able to, clear the clutter in a lot of cases. And in this case, this is just creating a record for individual abandonment, exactly as it looked. Clear the clutter, and we customized in quite a few cases to say, here's all I want to see, forget this web analytics crap. I just want to see what actually happened and focus on my missed opportunities.
Okay.
Good. So the other end of that coin is because we're storing all of this information, we're also able to recreate it on the front end as a playable record. So, yeah, I mean, you're pretty familiar. I'd say more similar to ClickTail than TLeaf because we are done, once again, as a web application. It's not on-premise. It's not on the wire in that case. But our actual page load is, on average, less than Google Analytics. What our big pain point or hurdle was from the larger organizations we spoke to isn't really the capability or the thought of storing in the information. It's more about the compression and structure of our database to be able to execute and do this without really leaving much of a footprint on the user's end.
That's something I was curious about, is what your footprint's like as far as its impact on the user experience if you're sending all this data back to your servers in real time.
Justin, you want to answer that more? Yeah, Justin's a bit deeper on the behind-the-scenes end.
Yeah, sure. From the development end, we spent a lot of resources and time developing the technology or our technique, I should say, to compress the data and send the data packets in as small-sized increments as possible to make it transparent to the end user so they don't notice any behavior of the page it's loading or any lag on their end. So everything is compressed to extremely high levels and then sent every incremented amount of seconds, basically with those user interactions contained within each data packet. So from a user experience perspective, there's literally no noticeable correlation that there's anything being tracked, similar to any other Google Analytics scripts.
Okay.
You need a deeper dig, Ryan, or can we keep moving forward?
We can move forward for now.
Great. So what I'm showing here, one of the big priorities these days for companies is digging into mobile in particular because, what's the value of a page visit in comparison to a traditional page visit, and people are still kind of figuring out how to monetize and understand the user experience in the best way possible. So a side of the coin here is we do this for mobile as well to a much higher level of detail than our competitors in that regard. You're able to see the zooms, you're able to see the rotations, and really everything that's happening from the mobile end as well. And in addition to everything that you see, all of this information is also being stored as a searchable data record to be able to look up correlations such as for mouse movement, how long are people engaging with their fingers on my screen, how many orientation flips, and just kind of letting you slice and dice the data from everything you see in that end. Last example I'll show there, just a few seconds long, is what the actual orientation changes look like on the front end, because for TLeaf, I would say, is definitely our biggest competitor on this end. I mean, they don't store the actual movement. Everyone says they do mobile, but they just kind of say, hey, there was an orientation change at this time. They can't actually replay any of it itself. So I'll let this play for a second. I'm sure it's pretty straightforward, but all those blue movements are the actual thumb and finger movement on the screen. So, yeah, and last point of interest there, other than the takeaway of the movement recreation mobile, is we're also differentiating between the first and second touch point on a mobile screen. Quite a few people with mobile now might be only looking at whether or not someone's engaged the screen. We are differentiating, because a lot of times you're using two different fingers on the screen to say here's when they engage with the first touch, here's the second, and being able to look at that simultaneous as well. So now I'm just going to show you a couple of other differentiated views. We have the broad concept of this recreation technology, a couple things that are exclusive to our company from a capability standpoint that in our mind kind of represent, you really can only do so much with web-based analytics or data. You can store it real time. You can recreate it as you have. The last hurdle that's exclusive to our company, we have a couple of patents pending on, is the ability to do this on a multi-session basis, also in real time. So what this is here is our live view where whether you want to look at a particular segment on a website or your site as a whole, if you had 5 active users, you would be able to, in real time, kind of analyze and monitor what they're doing. So in this case, a practical use case here would be just, monitoring a particular segment to see if there's any issues you might have not discovered within your general data discovery, just kind of figure out pain points. The other practical usage from our application is, we've integrated the ability to live chat with each of these customers. And because everything we do is from one database data source, it's pretty easy from a CRM perspective to do any kind of customization to potentially be able to just, integrate with a current chat or CRM app and just being able to reduce the time per resolution on each call by saying, hey, I told Joey to press the red button. Let's see if he actually presses it so I don't need to ask him over the phone. So that's, I suppose, the general premise of, where these are used from a capability standpoint. Other than that, I'll now... Go ahead, Ryan.
Well, tell me a bit about your target audience as far as size of organization, who you're intending this for.
Well,
primarily marketers for, are we talking, SMB market, mid-market?
I mean, we're talking about size-wise, we're looking at medium retail is the main focus. This discussion on our end, I'm not as much a value proposition as opposed to capability, so we're not going to throw all this usually, but it's usually all about the conversion process and either being able to close a higher percentage of sales or take a deeper look at the problems to, solve them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, the reason I ask is, I can definitely see where this would be functional if I'm in a case of, 5 to 10 current active sessions. But at mid-market retail organization, you're looking at hundreds to thousands of active sessions at any given moment, particularly during business hours, and how this would actually be able to handle me being able to see that much amount of data.
Yeah, I'm not sure it was combed over. So when I mentioned any particular segment, we do have everything we show has an internal system. So you could look at a particular segment. You said you wanted to only look at people who came from Canada who made 5 past purchases in the past. You could click Go Live only on that particular segment. I guess I was going to get there, but we have, an internal tagging system. So is that the question of that practical use or more about what the application from a load perspective?
I was kind of both, but more along the lines of, from a load perspective, doing that kind of thumbnailing and details on a single page, being able to handle large numbers of visitors. Seems like the browser itself wouldn't be able to handle that.
Yeah, it takes, when we've done, I'll tell you, there's no practical use cases where someone's looking at huge numbers. If we have a load, for instance, and our personal tests of thousands, et cetera, it takes a few seconds for the frames to initially load. So basically you wouldn't be able to engage customers who are only on the screen for a few seconds, but if you're kind of having a deeper visit, so to speak, once it loads, it can handle it, but it does take, takes a couple seconds of latency for the frame themselves. So,
Okay.
So other detail here, this is, and this is more usability, just kind of showing how we have the capabilities integrated. They're not all going to be the practical use case, of course, for every company. So you click View Details from this view. So if we're taking a look at our live traffic and I want to view the particular details on a customer, we have this customized view that we call basically, the entire user experience from one page. So what this is just, this is created for every visit on your page, where it basically shows, this is an individual session. Underneath is pages within a session by a customer. And then on top is being able to go back in their history and kind of go piece by piece into all of their past sessions and details. So the main added value there is, most of these products, particularly the more enterprise type, are usability-wise. Using these, you need someone really high on the technical level to know how to slice and dice and look around different data. We went out of our way to kind of make it a lot more easy to potential integrate it into a customer servicing cycle, or someone said your site blew up. Your site on a bank didn't do this last week. What did I actually happen on my session? It's just a pretty simple way to navigate through their history. We click this button here. It just shows the recreation and the exact resolution that the customer came from as well. So that's the case there. When I expanded it, means it was a larger screen than mine was. So it's just all little usability in that end. So any questions on that end, Ryan?
No on this, no. Well, actually, yeah. I mean, is there any means of being able to I guess my thinking is we're looking at raw sessions, but I may not know if I know there's a particular customer that I want to see. How easy is it to be able to, say, tag this as a specific customer, or let's say they filled out one of the forms on my site, so I've got somewhere in my system their information. How can I translate? Is this capable of translating that to be able to tell me Bob Smith revisited the site, something along those lines?
Yeah, we are keeping a complete user profile and history of all of, we have a, I'll get to it from where I'm going now, but we have a traditional analytics view as a starting point, where if you want to look at a segment or dig into anyone's past history and then kind of fill the gaps to go to the video. So are you familiar with Omniture by chance, Ryan?
Yes.
So, I mean, our goal was essentially, what they do that differentiates them from Google and a lot of the normal tools is, aside from being able to do a lot of deeper tagging and segmentation cases, is they can also deliver dynamic content with, I don't know if you're familiar with Mbox Create.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, being able to push content to particular segments. We also, we have a lot of those built-in analytics capabilities as well to really dig deep into the slicing and dicing. But to be honest, I talked about this with Steve quite a bit, as our bigger issue is, if I'm not speaking to someone such as yourself on the other end of the line, we're usually going to focus on just solving a very unique problem in one or two modules. So that's why we're just kind of digging deeper on the brainstorming on the marketing end. So.
Gotcha.
So to answer your question, I'm just going to show you real quick the tag delivery. So we do have a way to create events. I guess that's pretty traditional analytics, to have to add actual code on each page through events. What most clients we spoke to are, I guess, at the technical level, where they get frustrated with the difficulty of using Omniture and how many times they have to do things manually in exchange for the flexibility. So we have a lot simpler way to do tagging as well. So in this case, if I want to say high value abandonment, I want to choose a particular color for a user segment, and I want to choose we can number of times visited a page. We can do this with all of our data stored, but by default we're not going to have 50 different drop downs and I guess the less technical view. So we have this set up to, I kind of have to show you this last piece. Aside from that, you can also assign a value for any company. So you say someone who's come to my site and abandoned 3 times, let's say filling out your contact form, they've left 3 times. I could say every time someone does this, I want to increase their value to my company by 2, a specific variable. Or if you wanted to integrate into actual purchases made, you could say every time someone makes a purchase, I'm going to tag them a specific way and increase the value of that customer by a different variable. So this is kind of built in together to be able to filter through your traffic. And I'll show you in a second what that view looks like. So The reason I mentioned the color coding as well is because we didn't go into it here, but I mean the use case here is you only choose a few KPIs for client or per customer, where you can define them as deep as they want to go into the definitions, and then from all of these different views, including the live view, you have these tags listed below. You can have the key actions by events, and we're just picking and choosing kind of what actually matters, and not just dumping them with all this extra data. So I'll go to.
Okay.
So from here in the use case you mentioned, we kind of have this intermediary view if you want to dig down to the session by session level that gives, once again, by default, particular metrics, but if they want to choose more information, they want labeled there. If you create that tag, you'd be able to search and filter directly through here, or of course you could use any traditional filter to kind of choose what you actually want to take a look at.
What kind of filters can we do around the demographics of the visitor potentially?
What we store on the demographics, and Justin, you have that in front of you by chance too?
I mean, it's not necessarily the user demographics per se. It's more based on geographical information. But one additional metric is the ISP and organization of whoever their internet provider is. So if it's a particular company that owns their network, that will render and show which company is viewing your website or whatever you use to track.
Okay, so we'll be able to tag them. So I could create a segment for, let's say, North American visitors or something along those lines to be able to segment my analysis?
Yeah, absolutely.
Give me 1 second, actually, Ryan. I'll give you just a couple more of those to look up in front of me. Yeah, aside from that, I don't know how familiar you are with DMA codes. We have a lot of demographics we really haven't used much. I'm trying to read them. But yeah, I mean, we're storing the longitude, latitude of each customer. You can search through their actual city, their country, any kind of segment along those lines. I'm trying to find a deeper look. We can always forward that afterwards. Yeah, it's not in front of me, so. Other detail here I feel is relevant for someone who's, we've used all of those analytics as well, is you can also switch straight from the one individual visitor view to the session by session view to the page view when you view a record. Because if you have, one person who's coming to 10 different pages, 3 different sessions in the last day, you could go back and forth to kind of get that quantitative data without digging around into a lot of different dashboards. We've went through on that end. So yeah, aside from that, to conclude, I suppose, our analytics portion, it can take hours going through all different modules deriving the insight. But I mean, at the top level, do you have more questions at this point, Ryan, before I kind of move on to the other side of our coin, so to speak?
No, yeah, please go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, the last, I'm just going to bring up 2 general points, not go through the product itself, but a big differentiator and use case particular retail clients are interested in is, everyone does conversion funnels these days. If you take a look at a conversion funnel within an Omniture, within a Google, et cetera, and let's say you're identifying the 10 people who dropped out, or particular, let's say we're looking at something simple such as the 5 people who dropped out after filling in the first 4.9 pages of a purchase form. Usually you see that number and you see that within the funnel itself, where they went to. The problem is you don't really get the why around what happened. You need to kind of go back to square one as a marketer and say, how do we get that number down? So one of the big gaps, we do have conversion funnels on our end, but you're able to sync all of this directly to create particular processes and funnels, and then that's synced to the video play it directly. So I bring up that one case, and the other one is for heat maps. Ryan, do you have familiarity with how click maps and mouse movement maps, I guess, are rendered in most cases?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
so
color-coded.
Yeah, correct. So the big differentiator there is on the same, we don't need to dig too deep into how it looks, but on that same point, a usual heat map, you see 10 people are clicking on the top left of your site, That's awesome. Now you know that you have a problem. Are they confusing it for an image? Is it a responsive design issue in a different browser that's not being relayed? Regardless of the problem, we have all of our recordings synced within heat maps and a few other deeper analysis like that, because no one has time to watch millions of videos. It's all about just filling the gap of basically what your problems are and having that deeper capability.
I do have a question on the heat maps, though. One problem I've seen with them historically is if you have the same URL linked multiple places within a single page. Let's say I've got it as part of my top-level navigation, but I also happen to have a banner on my home page that's going to the same target URL. Most of the heat maps I've seen in the past basically take the first instance and lump all the clicks into that. Are you actually able to differentiate which one the person clicked on?
Justin, I'm pretty sure that answer is a very strong yes. We're doing it on each individual impression point, correct?
Yeah, we're not doing it based on the click flow, based on the actual link itself or the hyperlink element. It's actually based on the location of the XY coordinate that the user actually clicked on their screen relative to the element they clicked. So if it's on a top-level navigation, it would show up there, whereas if they clicked it on a different impression or different session, if they clicked the same link or the same hyperlink from a banner ad, it would register as a different click. But ultimately, they would go to the same place.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, a lot of, on that note too, I know a lot of, with an Omniture as an example, their actual heat maps are only showing based on the server logs. Again, when people go from place to place, they'll create that record like you said. We're doing this all with raw clicks and raw mouse movement and information because we're storing that extra information, why not in that end? So I have learned, I wasn't aware for a while that a lot of companies are doing heat maps these days, but yeah, not actually storing the raw clicks. So I suppose that might be a relevant differentiator. So on that end, anything else, Ryan, you can think of before I kind of show you the competitive intelligence side?
I may have missed it, but the high-level analytics of the site, I'm just curious about what you're doing from an aggregate perspective with all this data.
From an aggregate perspective, the long story short of it is we are customizing this. We have a very flexible data source where we can, through the tagging system, you can create different metrics to say, I want to create, we have all the defaults here in this view by default, but if you want to create this in advance, a company will tell us their 5 or 10 pain points or KPIs, and we'll go through here and customize these to be exactly kind of what they're looking for. So I guess especially for the sake of our conversation, I did, to be blunt, relay to Steve about our issue from capability versus, straightforward marketing. We have that capability to use all of our data very seamlessly there, and we're still kind of dealing with the different views and what people want by default. Does that make sense?
Okay.
So yeah, we have a few reporting dashboards. You can export this data. You can create different levels of users for different organizations. You can email it throughout, but we do have that capability if you want to tag someone who visited, paused for 5 seconds on your site, then, did something else. So. Aside from that, so I'm going to switch over to our competitive intelligence world. So basically what the other side of what our company does. So you said you have familiarity there. So you know what, Google, Bing, other mainstream search engines, the way they work is you register xyz.com tomorrow. The liability is going to be on your end to get indexed by them. That could take 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month, depending on whether they ping you or how your SEO is set up. So the reason I bring that up is people assume they have all of the information when they Google information. They have approximately 30 million domains out of an estimated 180 million current active websites. So the last 5 or 6 years, what we've done is kind of take a real close look into Google's algorithms and the other search engines and how they're storing information, and got to the point where we're able to store approximately 180 million active domains in one large database and be able to run analysis on, basically a search engine for an enterprise to take a close look at either competitors or their industry. Are we pretty good there? Ryan, you do have background, I guess. You understand that world pretty well, it sounded like?
Yeah, somewhat.
Somewhat. Okay. So yeah, so basically it's not 1994, 1996. So normal users really don't care about having a search engine, that has more domains. It's not much relevance. But when it comes down to companies themselves and want to customize this information, our typical deliverable or request is you would be able to tag your competitors' domains. Let's say you wanted to look at 3 in this case. We would be monitoring their traffic rank, and every week or every month, if there was an increase in traffic, you would be able to see the associated source code changes, which in most cases is going to give you, if someone had 50,000 new Facebook likes in the last month and they changed a headline, You see they had a 40% increase of traffic. It's probably worth taking a closer look at the campaign. The other practical use here is, other than, everything you can do in source code, there's a lot more than social media headline, but when it comes down to someone adding on to your Google Analytics, that's apparent as well with a lot of technologies, a lot of banner advertising, that whole world. So you're just really able to tag them, and we're re-grabbing that information as often as competitors want for their key competitors. And we can also do a more broad tag on their entire industry, such as if you wanted to say, my competitors or anyone who uses the word "what matters" within their title tag. Let's give that pretty deep, non-realistic example. And there's 50,000 different websites who are currently doing that. You would be able to run a more broad monitor on them and see, hey, 3.5% of these in the last month has been using jQuery. Here's the average page load speed of my competitors, and I'm not going to dig too much deeper, but that's the long story short of our deliverable, is letting tracking what's going on the internet. Either customized basis or in a more simple way where they can choose KPIs and say, here's what I want to monitor. So,
now, when you're saying like social media changes, are you looking for mentions of them, or are you looking at, say, the corporate Facebook pages for that competitor?
yeah, I mean, the truth is it really matters. In a lot of cases, you're not going to get mentions. It depends what's detectable from how their page is set up, I suppose. So we're not tracking these competitors directly with code. We're just taking their source code, everything publicly available, and in a lot of cases it will track that information directly on the page. So it will be case by case. You're not going to get as much data each time. It's more of kind of a broad look to dig a bit deeper.
So the social media, it's only getting through their website?
Correct. Through their website in that case. And in those cases as well, that's by default on our end. What we've been doing actually as of late is also, if you can get the information from YouTube, from Facebook, additional, we kind of add those tags on those sites as well and update them directly. But yeah, the long story deliverable is usually everything that you can get from the page. So that's what we have in the 180 million domains.
Hey Pat, just to clarify, the social media is not actually coming from them alone. We're using a combination of mashing up APIs from the social channels themselves, in addition to the page source of the website being tracked, in order to get those numbers. So it's a combination of sources for those, not specifically and only the domain itself source.
So yeah, and just show, I guess, where that's located within our, this is all within one backend, one module, so to speak. That is located in the same place as everything else. So if companies do have the request to kind of get their, we call, the 360-degree website intelligence from one view and take a look at their competitors in the same place as the normal analytics to be able to benchmark. We do have that kind of in the same place. But most cases, people will want all of this modularized depending on their actual use case. So on that end, Ryan, yeah, I'm going to take a breath for a few minutes. And do you have any other questions? I guess things more on the top level as a whole. That's essentially it on our end from a more raw capabilities.
Trying to think for a moment. Can I actually see one of the competitive intelligence pages within the product itself?
Yeah, we can take a look right here. I think your question is going to be, a lot. I will say our product does take setup time on the back end. In this case, these were the metrics that were by default requested: performance, social, and SEO. So that's, yeah. Is this where you wanted to look, Ryan?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I guess the relevant details based on our conversation as well is delivery of our product, I suppose, is usually in the 5 to 6 week setup range. We do have to do some custom. So if once you add the code as the client on your page, it's not completely, executable. We do need to do Q&A on our end internally. And in just about all those cases, when it comes to these dashboards, we're going to customize this for any enterprise for, you know, the KPIs they want to see that are feasible. We'll get custom requests on that end. So that's usually, I guess, the other, I'm thinking of the other details you'd need from a marketing.
How much work on the customer themselves?
An average, I suppose, average hours needed to accomplish requests. Is that long story short, Ryan?
Yeah, their workload as far as onboarding.
Oh,
The workload for the customer themselves is very, very minimal. It's just adding a JavaScript tag to, or just before the closing body tag of an HTML document. So most organized companies have includes for their footer and all those types of elements. So usually it's a cut and paste one time, so a matter of seconds. Then everything else is, from an IT perspective, the costs are minimal as far as implementation. It's all on us to get it set up and ready to go.
Okay.
yeah, our hard cost internally is basically the data storage. You know, we are able to play with this information well, but the actual creating, you know, an average of 1,000 more records than a traditional, you know, Google Analytics is a direct comparison. That's our cost, and our pricing is ballpark based around the number of actual page views, because that's our internal hard cost on our end. So yeah, if we're done with the product in that case, Ryan, you know, I think the premise of this conversation, to kind of give you some more background with Steve, is I was telling him that from a capability standpoint, you know, we've spent quite a while being able to do these things and manipulate them, and I guess in the way that we thought everything you could do with analytics, but we are on the point of where we're still dealing with a straightforward deliverable and, you know, having different pitches every time, and on our end internally, just being able to give the value proposition in a concise way and have follow-up documents that align, you know, without getting too off task. So that's kind of where our conversation went from a, you know, understanding our weaknesses and capabilities, because we did just launch a few months ago, and that's kind of where we're at internally. So I think that was one of the main premises, aside from the technical, you know, take a deep dig based on your knowledge. That was the points that we made pretty clear to Steve, not pretending along the lines of, you know, we have all this perfectly polished when it comes down to the marketing and delivery. And you were the one who said that's exactly what he does, based on having both of those backgrounds, is kind of helping to productize things a lot more clear. So.
Okay, I see.
Anything? Let me ask you, Ryan. I know you guys are on a. We hadn't mentioned that we're on a LAMP stack. I'm not sure he said. This is a web-based application. It's cloud-based, of course. You log in. Everything is on. We're using a LAMP stack for this, and all of this is within one database. So we're able to, you know, slice and dice and integrate this. If there was a thought of a CRM, any of those other modules, a lot easier, because we don't have, you know, 20 degrees of separation between the technical guys and the actual front end. So that was the biggest objective of creating all this, was being able to use it in a lot of cases in the future, not just be, you know, tied down to one scenario. So
does each customer get their own instance up in the cloud, or are they all accessing a common interface?
No, they all have their own unique instance. None of them share the same data source.
Okay. I don't suppose you do anything similar to this for directly within any of the social media platforms.
From the analytics perspective or the competitive intelligence perspective?
The analytics perspective.
Tracking analytics for Facebook apps and things along those lines, is that what you're wondering? Yeah. No, not currently. But we have a general knowledge of how we would go about that as a next step, if that were a request or a high demand scenario, that we could tie that data together with ours. It has been asked before, so.
Okay.
So anything else on your, does this give you a pretty good, I guess, do you have a pretty good top level view from a capabilities perspective? Are there any other gaps needed, or are we pretty good for the premise of the conversation, right?
I think we're pretty good. I mean, um, actually, one other question. So when you're doing these recordings,
Mm-hmm.
um, you're basically using the log data that you've had funneled over from system metrics, but the actual image of the website, is that something you generate that image at the time that the person trafficked the site, or is it something that's generated at the time that you're actually viewing the video?
It's not an image at all. It's the actual page HTML and the source code of the page at the time the user visited. So it's taking the elements that were exactly in place at the moment they were there and recompiling that into an iframe and size of our choosing that can be reviewed at the same resolution in which the user initially captured it. So if someone was there on a laptop of 1280 by 768, that's what would be reproduced from a back-end perspective with the original HTML intact, including all assets, images, JavaScript, etc.
You're also pulling down all the assets?
We're not pulling, but we're staying and communicating with their assets in order to retrieve them accurately at the time of initial capture.
When is the video actually rendered? Is it only produced when I tell you to show me this session, or is it generated like, say, every night or something like that?
It's on demand. So whenever you basically request a particular session is when it's created.
Okay.
The data always exists. It's just not played through and looped through to create the video unless it's requested to do so.
Yeah, the main reason I ask is if I'm looking at a session and I just went through a site redesign, say a month ago, and I happen to be looking at an older visitor session, it would show potentially, if those images don't exist anymore or the CSS has been considerably changed, is it showing me my present site or is it showing me before the redesign?
So that's a very good point. Anyone with a familiar background in a technical background or engineering background picks that. It's going to show you or try to show you what existed then, and if those assets no longer exist, like images, for example, it'll be a blank placeholder of where that image previously existed. The internal storage costs for us to actually retrieve all the assets in addition to the HTML, like the images and scripts and CSS documents that they use to render their page accurately, our internal storage costs will just skyrocket. So it's a balance of how much are people really going to be looking at videos that are that old versus the analytics that are that old that aren't affected by those decisions.
True. I'm kind of thinking the immediate transition period, like say the first couple of weeks after that transition, you may have some issues.
Right.
One other question is, what's your approach for organizations that have multiple sites, like say microsites or something like that, where a single user session could be jumping between multiple microsites?
When it comes down to our dashboard, I hadn't really talked about it. We've had these requests in actually quite a few cases. If someone wants to see a different account for a subdomain, or if someone wants to group into one account multiple websites, we can customize that internally. Out of the box, we're going to do it by each hard domain when it comes down to a user session history. But if we need to make even a change, if your domain is 100 letters long and you want it listed as 2, we can do that on the global level without much pain. Is that all pretty, is that still how we're set up, Justin? I haven't been back there in a minute, so.
Basically, instead of adding since you're familiar with analytics, you're aware that if you paste analytics code onto your site, it usually has a unique ID, right, that triggers your site. So what you can do is add your microsite or a subdomain, whatever it may be, to allow the domain list for that same ID, and then you can seamlessly go back and forth between those sites and show up under the same database. So you'd be essentially going from site to site within the same videos.
That's what I was asking. So if a visitor hits my site, I'm watching the recording later, and they come to my homepage, they go to a product page, the product has a microsite associated with it, and they jump over to it, and then come back to the main site, or even go to a third microsite, that I would have a single seamless video that would show me each of those, or would it actually be segmented?
It would be included in the same video, so that total session would be all strung together exactly as it appeared, because you'd be using the same JavaScript code snippet on each of those sites.
Okay.
So it would replay it exactly as it occurred for the visitor from each microsite to each microsite.
Okay.
Yeah, the last thing I'll mention on that end, you brought up whether or not we're storing an image or a code. It's relevant because ClickTail is storing an image, and they're kind of there's been a lot of critiques through the industry about the fact if you're just taking a picture of what happened, how much less responsive it is when they're scraping a page and taking a picture of it compared to actually recreating the environment from code. So that's actually one of our big differentiators when it comes down to knowing server errors that showed up or things that were actually errors on the page that both for heat maps themselves, there's a lot of them that aren't, we're able to dig into the resolution used for each heat map, so you can actually look at the difference between mobile and, a screen that's one resolution between another, when most of the mainstream, Crazy Egg, as far as I know, is the most mainstream heat map. They're just doing it on a way that says there's one heat map for every resolution, where it's bothered us a lot because they asked us, why can't you give us a heat map total for a resolution? I said, because different resolutions exist, So we've played with that on a lot of ends, but capability-wise, we can break it down a lot more detailed on those ends. So, last thing, Ryan, this isn't to get too deep into here, but I did find what's listed here when it comes down to not more the geographical location, what we store by default. So, if any of that is of note, we haven't had much use for DMA code and Metro code yet on requests, but I am familiar on the advertising end, particularly with TV. That's a pretty high-value metric to store as well. So,
yeah, and especially if you're talking to brick and mortar retail.
Correct. Yeah, I think on our end, other than that, based off our conversation, we had other points of it. Yeah, I guess that's it. Use case is a different discussion, but this was more on the premise of understanding capability and talking about if there's just a potential fit to within what you guys do, and I kind of outlined our internal situation, obviously in a lot more depth with Steve. So,
gotcha.
All right, Ryan, you have anything else, Justin? Or are we good?
No, I'm all set on my end.
Okay, so Ryan, I had told the end of our discussion as well yesterday was after we spoke, I'd give him a bit of time, and we were going to call and circle back, me and Steve directly. So, are you going to have a chance in the next hour or so? I don't know what your schedule looks like to relay and have a discussion. Was that on the plate, or are you just kind of being thrown in last second here? So,
I'm going to try and get something to him in the next hour. We hadn't, like I said, the only thing I really heard was just the conversation he and I had on the phone last night. So,
okay. So on that note, if you would be able to do me a favor and just send me an email once you have that conversation, so I obviously don't call beforehand, that would be appreciated. And I suppose if you have any other questions or details, we have each other's contact information. So.
Okay, sounds good.
All right. Thanks a lot, Ryan. It was nice talking to you, and have a good one.
You too.
Bye.